"Pretend you're my fiancé for a night," said the CEO. What the single dad's answer stunned all. Madison Carter was the kind of woman who made headlines without even trying. She was the face of resilience in America's business world. A self-made millionaire who had built her consulting empire from scratch after being left with nothing but determination and a few good ideas. Her name appeared on Forbes lists. Her company dominated the tech consulting industry. And her life, at least from the outside, looked like the definition of the American dream. Yet, beneath the surface of boardrooms and penthouses, Madison carried a scar that no amount of success could cover. It came back to her on an ordinary Thursday morning when her assistant dropped a cream-colored envelope on her glass desk. Madison barely glanced at it at first, brushing through contracts and financial reports until her eyes froze on the words, "You are cordially invited." She didn't need to read further to know who it was from. The wedding invitation felt like a cruel joke, handwritten in perfect calligraphy, inviting her to celebrate the marriage of her ex-fiancé, the man who had once promised her forever but had chosen wealth and social status over the woman who had built dreams beside him. Her chest tightened as she stared at the name, her mind replaying the night he had walked out of her life, leaving her standing in a rain-soaked dress with nothing but humiliation. She had taken that heartbreak and built an empire, rising higher than even he had imagined. But now, the thought of walking into that lavish Napa Valley estate alone, with every guest waiting to whisper about her failed love life, made her stomach twist. She could face hostile boardrooms without fear, but this was personal. For a moment, she thought of ignoring the invitation, throwing it into the shredder and pretending it never arrived. But deep down, Madison knew she couldn't run. Walking away would only hand her ex another victory, another reason for people to say, "She's powerful in business, but powerless in love." That wasn't the story she wanted written about her. Still, the idea of showing up alone felt unbearable. And it was then, as her eyes drifted toward the city skyline beyond her office windows, that a memory surfaced, an encounter weeks ago with a man so different from her world that he had left an unexpected mark on her. Daniel Brooks, the single dad she had met by chance, the mechanic whose kindness had felt more genuine than any champagne toast at her corporate galas, a man who had nothing to prove and everything to fight for. Madison's lips curved into a half-smile, though her heart raced at the thought. It was a reckless idea, maybe even insane, but it was better than walking in alone. If she was going to face her past, maybe she needed someone real by her side, someone who wasn't impressed by her title or her fortune, but who could remind her of the one thing she often forgot she deserved: respect. And so, as she held that invitation tighter, Madison knew one thing for sure. This wedding wouldn't just reopen old wounds. It would change her life forever. Madison Carter had faced down CEOs twice her age, negotiated deals worth millions, and built her name into something people respected in every corner of the business world. But nothing she had done in her career compared to the nerves rushing through her chest as she sat behind the wheel of her sleek black Mercedes, parked outside a modest auto repair shop on the outskirts of town. Her manicured fingers tapped against the leather steering wheel, her mind replaying the thought that had kept her awake the entire night. Was she really going to ask a mechanic she barely knew to be her date at her ex's wedding? The sign above the shop was simple: Brooks Auto Repair. The glass front was streaked with grease stains, and a child's drawing taped to the door fluttered in the wind. Madison's eyes softened at the crayon picture of a smiling car with the words, "Daddy fixes everything," scribbled in bold colors. She could almost imagine Daniel's little boy proudly putting it there. That small detail reminded her why she had thought of him in the first place. Daniel wasn't just a man who turned wrenches. He was a father, a protector, someone grounded in a kind of loyalty she rarely saw in her world of boardrooms and private jets. Finally, with a deep breath, Madison stepped out of her car. The clack of her heels against the concrete seemed out of place here, like she was stepping onto another planet. Inside, the scent of oil and metal filled the air. She found Daniel crouched beneath the hood of a pickup truck, a smudge of grease across his forearm, his dark hair slightly mussed, his jawline sharp even under the harsh fluorescent light. He glanced up, surprised, and for a second, his blue eyes carried that same warmth she remembered, the kind of look that made her feel seen, not just looked at. "Madison?" His voice held genuine surprise. "Didn't expect to see you here." "Car trouble?" She hesitated, realizing how absurd her request was going to sound, but pushed forward anyway. "No, it's not about my car. I need your help." Daniel wiped his hands on a rag, tilting his head in curiosity. "What kind of help are we talking about?" Madison swallowed, her heart pounding louder than the sound of tools clattering in the background. "I got invited to my ex's wedding. And I can't show up alone. I was wondering if you'd come with me." The words hung in the air, bold and vulnerable, all at once. Daniel blinked, clearly caught off guard, before a faint smile tugged at his lips. "You want me to be your date?" "At a millionaire's wedding?" Her cheeks flushed. "I know it sounds crazy, but you're the only person I could think of who wouldn't judge me, who wouldn't play games. You're real, Daniel, and I need that." For a moment, he didn't answer. The sound of an engine revving in the shop next door filled the silence. Then Daniel nodded slowly, his expression softening. "All right, Madison. I'll do it. But on one condition, you don't treat this like some business deal. If I go as myself. No pretending to be someone I'm not." Relief washed over her, and for the first time since holding that invitation, Madison felt the weight lift off her chest. She smiled, a genuine smile she hadn't shown in years. Deal. What neither of them realized was that this reckless decision, to walk into a wedding together, would spark a chain of events neither Madison nor Daniel could have ever imagined. The morning of the wedding arrived with a mix of excitement and unease. Madison stood in front of her mirror, the satin of her emerald green gown flowing like liquid against her skin. Her stylist had insisted on a look that screamed power and elegance, the kind of statement that told everyone in the room she had moved on. She was thriving. But no amount of couture could quiet the nervous flutter in her chest. She wasn't nervous about her ex. She was nervous about walking in with Daniel, a man so different from the polished executives she usually surrounded herself with. Meanwhile, across town, Daniel tied the only silk tie he owned in front of a cracked bathroom mirror. His little boy, Jacob, sat on the bed swinging his legs, watching him with a proud smile. "Daddy, you look like one of those superheroes," Jacob said, his voice full of innocence. Daniel chuckled, ruffling his son's hair. "Not sure about that, buddy. But I'll try not to embarrass anyone tonight." He didn't admit it out loud, but part of him worried about exactly that, stepping into a world where he didn't belong. When Madison's car pulled up to pick him up, the contrast was almost comical. She stepped out looking like royalty, while Daniel, though handsome and strong in his tailored navy suit, carried the aura of a man who belonged under a hood fixing an engine, not under a chandelier sipping champagne. Still, when their eyes met, there was something reassuring in the way Madison smiled at him. For that brief second, neither of them cared about class, wealth, or appearances. It was just two people choosing to walk into the fire together. The wedding venue was nothing short of extravagant. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above tables draped in ivory silk, and a string quartet played softly in the background. Guests whispered as Madison entered, her hand brushing against Daniel's arm. The whispers grew louder when they realized she wasn't alone, and certainly not with another CEO or billionaire's son. No, she had walked in with a mechanic. Daniel felt the stares immediately, the judgment heavy in the air like humidity before a storm. He straightened his shoulders, reminding himself of the promise he had made. He was here as himself, nothing more, nothing less. Madison could sense his discomfort, so she leaned closer and whispered, "Let them stare. Tonight isn't about them. It's about us showing them they don't control our story." But as the night unfolded, tension began to brew. Madison's ex, William, spotted her across the room. His smug grin widened as his eyes slid from her to Daniel. He excused himself from his bride's side and made his way toward them with the swagger of a man who thought he still held power over Madison. The air between them thickened, the kind of silence that warned everyone nearby that something dramatic was about to happen. Daniel caught the look in William's eyes, a mix of mockery and arrogance. He tightened his jaw, bracing himself, because he knew this night wasn't going to pass quietly. The moment William stepped into their circle, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. He was dressed in a tailored tuxedo, his every move dripping with arrogance, as if the wedding was less about his bride and more about proving he was still the man who controlled the room. He looked Madison up and down, his smirk sharp enough to cut glass, before his gaze shifted to Daniel. "So this is what you've traded up for?" William sneered, his voice loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "From boardrooms to blue collars. I've got to say, Madison, I didn't think desperation suited you." His words dripped with condescension, and the people lingering around them pretended to sip their champagne while listening intently, feeding off the drama like moths to a flame. Daniel could have ignored it. He could have walked away. But one look at Madison, who stood frozen, her hand tightening on his arm as if anchoring herself, and he knew this was not the time to stay quiet. He straightened his shoulders, meeting William's smug stare without flinching. "You know what's funny?" Daniel said calmly, his voice low but steady enough to carry through the hum of the ballroom. "The loudest men in the room are always the ones most afraid of being forgotten." The comment landed like a punch, wiping the grin off William's face, and a ripple of whispers spread across the guests who couldn't believe someone had dared to challenge him on his wedding night. Madison's heart pounded. She had never seen Daniel like this, confident, grounded, refusing to shrink under the weight of wealth and reputation. There was no bitterness in his tone, no desperation to prove himself, just an unwavering truth that shook the ground William walked on. William's face reddened, his voice rising as he snapped, "Don't play hero in a suit that doesn't belong to you. She'll realize soon enough you don't belong in her world." Before Daniel could respond, Madison stepped forward, her voice sharp but trembling with emotion. "William, stop." The room quieted instantly. She had spent years shrinking under his arrogance, but tonight she wasn't the same woman he once belittled. Her eyes locked with his, steady and unflinching. "You may have thought you defined me once, but those days are over. This," she gestured toward Daniel, "is more real than anything I ever had with you." Gasps rippled through the crowd, and even William's bride shifted uncomfortably, realizing the spotlight had turned in a direction no wedding vows could fix. William, however, wasn't ready to let go. His pride was wounded, and pride is a dangerous thing in a man like him. He leaned closer, his voice dropping so only Madison and Daniel could hear. "This ends badly for both of you. You think she'll really choose you over everything she's built? You're just a chapter she'll regret." Daniel didn't respond with words this time. Instead, he turned to Madison, his expression gentle, almost protective, as if silently asking her if she was ready to stand with him against everything, and for the first time, Madison felt the weight of choice pressing on her shoulders, not between two men, but between two worlds. The room felt frozen in time, as if the chandeliers themselves had stopped sparkling just to see what Madison would do next. Every eye was on her, every breath held in suspense. William's words still echoed in the air, dripping with venom and arrogance, yet it was Daniel's silence that carried the greatest weight. He didn't try to convince her, didn't beg for her loyalty. He simply stood there, tall and steady, his hand open at his side, ready if she chose to take it. Madison's chest rose and fell as she looked between the two men. William represented everything she had once thought she wanted: power, prestige, the illusion of security. But Daniel represented something William never could: authenticity. The strength to stand tall without belittling others, the ability to love without conditions, and the courage to let her be herself instead of molding her into what made him look good. Suddenly, Madison stepped closer to Daniel, her voice trembling at first but growing stronger with every word. "You're wrong, William. I don't regret him. What I regret is wasting years on someone who thought control was love. You may have money, but Daniel has something you'll never understand: respect, loyalty, and a heart that doesn't have a price tag." The ballroom erupted with gasps and murmurs, and for the first time that night, William's confident smirk faltered. His pride couldn't save him from the sting of Madison's truth. His bride stood rigid beside him, her smile plastered on, but her eyes revealing the uncomfortable realization that she had just married a man stripped bare in front of everyone. Daniel, still calm, turned to Madison with a softness in his eyes that made her breath catch. "You don't owe me anything," he said quietly. "But if you're ready for something real, I'll be here. Not for your wealth, not for your status, but for you." Madison felt tears sting her eyes, not from sadness but from the overwhelming sense of freedom she hadn't felt in years. For once, she wasn't choosing out of fear or pressure. She was choosing out of love. Without hesitation, she slid her hand into Daniel's, and the ballroom filled with whispers that turned into applause from those who saw the courage it took to defy expectation. William tried to speak, but his words faltered. He could only watch as Madison walked away with Daniel, hand in hand, their silhouettes framed by the golden light of the chandeliers. For him, the night had been about control. For Madison, it had become about liberation. Outside, as the cool night air wrapped around them, Madison finally exhaled, her laugh breaking through the tension. Daniel looked at her, a half smile on his lips. "You know," he said, "I didn't plan on crashing a wedding tonight." Madison chuckled, squeezing his hand tighter. "And I didn't plan on finding the one person who reminded me what love really feels like." In that moment, under the glow of the city lights, she realized her story wasn't about reclaiming what William had stolen, but about rewriting her future with someone who had never asked her to be anything but herself. For Madison, the American dream wasn't power in a boardroom. It was walking beside a man who made her heart feel at home. Thank you for watching this powerful story to the end. If you felt the emotions and lessons within, imagine what more we have waiting for you. Don't let this be the last time you join us. Click on the next story on your screen, because every tale we share carries its own twist, heart, and inspiration. And before you go, take a second to subscribe so you'll never miss the next story that might just touch your soul in ways you didn't expect.